China has mass-produced hypersonic missiles that they can fire within central China that can hit anywhere on the West Coast, just obliterate anything here. They have more advanced air defense, autonomous drones that are piloted along with the J-35. They really are rolling things out at such a huge rate. And then when I see the United States, we keep on talking about how we're just so great, so awesome. Because of what? The F-35? We keep on talking about the F-16. That thing's like 40 years old. Where is the new super fancy tech that we were supposed to be to keep us have the edge? We have our parade with the drones. They just have some guys dancing with their little drones. It's like, it's a joke. Like, this posturing, constant posturing with nothing to back it up is embarrassing to me. It's pathetic.
Yeah. No, I was embarrassed. I think all of us have seen the memes contrasting the U.S. parade to the parade in China. Earlier it was between like the parade in Moscow versus the parade in China. But this was even a greater contrast, I think we have to admit. And it was funny, but sometimes it's kind of painful. This is my country. Yeah. I remember being very proud of my country when I was young, even if I had my differences with it, and say, we really are the best in a lot of ways. And now just come on, people, this is really, really embarrassing. Who, like the people who were responsible for that parade, every last one of them should have been fired. But that's part of the thing. It's just like we just don't seem to have any accountability. It's just that, all this incompetence is so often rewarded. And
we shouldn't even have a military, in my opinion. We got Canada,
or a much smaller one, no question about it.
Just have some border control if you want. You got Canada North. It's fine.
Right.
They're Canadians. They're not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
No,
exactly right. It's just like, why do we have this? We have because we insist on being the global hegemon. We need to project power around the whole world. That's why we have these fleets. That's why we have this huge air force. That's the reason. If we became if we accepted the multipolar world, we could easily cut it in half. Could cut it by 75% or more, and we would be safer because we wouldn't get involved in conflicts around the world, needlessly involved. And we would be a lot wealthier. Again, it's just like this idiocy, this insistence on being the global hegemon is impoverishing us, and it's going to bring about an economic collapse. Sometimes because we focus on geopolitics, we make too much of the Pentagon budget. But that's just part of it. There is, but it's the part that I think is the most easily cut, most painlessly cut. When you talk about Social Security and these other things, okay, there would be real social consequences to that, and maybe a wise choice to cut them. That's not something I'm getting into here, but in the case of our military budget, there really is no downside. There's only an upside, and we could cut it way, way back, and we would not be any less safe. In fact, I would argue we would be safer.
Yeah. Well, which conflict do you think we're going to get involved in next? Because we're not going to get rid of our MIC. We're going to keep on getting embroiled in these wars, even though we can't win them. They're destabilizing. They're damaging the United States. They're damaging the countries that, if anything, I think it's very horrible what we do to those countries. But I think in ways it empowers them. I'm just thinking like countries like Iran. Even the Houthis, like they're becoming this moral superpower around the world because they're standing up.
Yeah. Of course, they've really suffered too.
They have suffered. But I think that they will reap the benefits for eternity or for a long time that you were on the right side of history. And I think that that's something that we can't really understand now because we're living through history. But just how this will shape kind of the mind and the way that people view you and your country for so long. Because basically that's what we're coming to the end of the World War II history era. That's just kind of defined the West, and that's how we based our morality, to use it to justify any type of action, whatever it is, and that's it. But now I think that's run its course, and we're going to be looking at things differently.
Well, it should have. I think among our elites, they're hanging on to it. They are really
because it serves their purpose,
right? Yeah. Exactly. It should have it really did end, with the fall of the Soviet Union. We entered a new era, and there was a chance that we could have accepted this new era and, disbanded NATO and so on and so forth. But it didn't. We went a different way with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, I was asking earlier, though, do you think that we're going to be, where we're going to go next? Venezuela? Is it going to be Iran? Are we going to, go back to are we going to escalate more in Ukraine? I mean,
right. Well, if there's going to be something, if something's going to happen in Venezuela, it'll probably happen sooner rather than later. I mean, we got all those ships there. Maybe something is going to happen any day. I don't know, but it's just like, what do they put those ships there in that submarine? And they're moving other assets into the area, is my understanding. But of course, whatever happens in Venezuela, it could be awful for the Venezuelans, but it's like in geopolitical terms, I don't think it's going to be all that impactful. Maybe actually I'm underestimating the effects. I think there will be a lot of anger throughout Latin America. And, this is like the one part of the world where we are supposed to, where no matter what, we should have a tremendous amount of influence. We do. But if we abuse that influence, it's going to be, it's not going to be to our benefit. So anyway, yeah, there could be real, consequences to some sort of attack on Venezuela. But as for between, let's say, Iran and Ukraine, I don't know. Really, again, there's been a fair amount of talk, I've noticed, among analysts. They feel like there's going to be an attack by Israel on Iran during the next few months, like by the end of the year. But I just don't see the evidence for it. They may be right. I'm not saying, who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but I just don't. They don't really. I haven't seen very convincing evidence for this. And then, like I've said, we're just not hearing it from the governments themselves. In particular from the Israel and the U.S. There was a lot of reason to believe that a war was about to occur before it did occur, and we're just not seeing that. In fact, Trump is staying very firm on the idea that the obliteration, was totally successful. And end of story. Let's not talk about this. So for now, I don't see, an immediate threat. I think it's going to be, if it happens, it'll be next year or maybe even later. And then Ukraine, it's going to be when if there's going to be an intervention, it will be, by NATO. It'll happen when maybe the Russians cross the Dnieper or head towards Odessa or head towards Kiev or something. By the way, there was, just on that subject, if I can change the topic very briefly, recently Gerasimov gave a talk on what was happening on the front line. It was quite detailed. He talked about these 4 cities that I was saying earlier under siege, and saying that actually the Russians have now entered all 4 of them. So they're not just surrounding them, they're actually in the cities, including Seversk, which was kind of a surprise for me. But people noticed that actually in the background there was a map, and the map showed Nikolaev and Odessa as Russian territory. Now, again, the Putin and Lavrov and the others they have hinted that maybe, that they might go to Odessa, or it may, more than might, that there's a real chance that they will, but they have not announced that. But here it was on the map. And I think later there was a member of the Duma, the Russian parliament, an important member, like the head of a committee, who explained that, well, okay, those, like what you see in Nikolaev and Odessa, those would be buffer zones. So they're not actually, at least temporarily, not declaring that Russian territory, And then he mentioned, though this didn't appear on the map as far as I could tell, Kharkov and Sumy. He said that there's also going to be a need to create buffer zones up there. So that may be at least like what the Russians do temporarily, is that they've moved into Kharkov, and they're well in, the oblast of Kharkov, and in Sumy. They've actually gone into Dnipropetrovsk. They're not declaring that Russian territory, but declaring that buffer zones to protect Russian territory. And that may be the stance that they take in the future. Again, this is just one member of the Duma. This is one map, but it is very suggestive.
Yeah, I imagine Odessa, Nikolaev, Kharkov, when this is all said and done, will be Russian territory by the end of this. Like I don't think the Russian people would be okay with
Yeah,
not happening.
I think that's true. The majority would not. Again, Putin's very cautious. But I think he himself has made statements that, I think he in fact said that Odessa is a Russian city, not saying that it belongs to Russia now, but it was founded by Catherine the Great. The people there are basically Russians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll see. It's just so crazy to me that the Europeans are talking about like we're getting ready to go to war, and that Zelensky is not willing to make any concessions. Not even Crimea. It's like, come on, man. Like, what?
Yeah, I think
Give
I think
something, right?
right.
Something.
There's
just
been a little bit of a concession. There has been a slight change in his attitude and his demands, but very slight. Yeah, I mean, it's just that actually, if you go back like last year, he wouldn't even accept a ceasefire. He was actually opposed to a ceasefire all the way up until I think it was that Riyadh meeting this earlier this year. And then after that, he switched. And I think, it's partly because of pressure from the U.S., but then I think also it just became apparent that, hey, we're really losing. A ceasefire would be to our advantage. So that's been a change, from the first couple of years of the war. And then the other thing is, well, let's see. I guess he's now saying he's open to like just freezing the lines. But he still says that eventually we'll get him back, but there's less talk about actually conquering, taking him back. Yeah, he still claims Crimea. It just maybe it's going to be through diplomatic means. He's somewhat adjusted his rhetoric, but he's still insisting on all those territories. He's just will allow a ceasefire, at least a temporary freeze. But with the ultimate objective of getting it all back, maybe just through sanctions, these, I don't know what other sanctions are going to be, but, he still seems to have he and Meretz and others seem to have this abiding faith in sanctions to force the Russians to surrender these territories. Obviously it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you remember that the Ukrainian MP, I forget his name right now, that was assassinated. We were speculating that maybe it was Russia that did it, but we saw later that it was the father of a soldier that committed the assassination. And do we think that there's still any tie to Russia here, or that we are starting to experience some real revolt? People are like, you got my son killed.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Yeah, it appears to have been, a Ukrainian acting on his own. That appears to what if there was any kind of Russian connection, I think we would see the evidence. The Ukrainian authorities spoke of a Russian trace, but they haven't shown anything. So I think that is the correct assumption. Now, one thing I've learned, since the assassination is that the importance of this person, that he was really central to the key events in the Maidan coup, that he was the head of the muscle, essentially, the ones that actually committed the violence that brought about the coup. And there's all kinds of video evidence, that he was the guy. I mean, and then in Odessa, he was the one who sent the forces down to Odessa that ended up committing this atrocity of the trade union building. And then he was the one who, I think earlier, began issued the instructions to beginning the shelling of Donetsk city. So, I mean, he's got all kinds of, or he did have all kinds of blood on his hands. Again, it's just a central figure. He's been described as like the godfather of the Banderites. So he was not a minor player, very much a major player, and really, a very, very violent and man who did, was responsible for much death and destruction in his country and in the Donbass.
Yeah, he's clearly an evil man. I think it's appropriate to describe him as an open neo-Nazi. This is not a good guy. But yeah, I saw the video of the funeral. There's a lot of people that that really loved him, though. He seems like he did. It kind of shows you that this Band-Aid ideology is deep. It's deep within in Western Ukraine, and I don't know how you're going to break that. It's just
and it seems to be growing in influence. I mean, there was a time like in elections, those parties would get 2%. And that was often used as evidence by the West that, see, they're really negligible. I mean, they would get 2% of the vote, but they had a outsized influence within the government, and mainly because, again, they were the muscle. And so, like that in Maidan, they were the ones that really, that carried out that false flag attack and brought about the coup. And then they were the ones that were willing to fight the separatists in the East. When the rebellion broke out in the Donbass, like the average Ukrainian soldier didn't want to go fight his brother, but these guys would. So they've been really key in that willingness to commit violence has made them increasingly influential in the government. And then over time, they've gained control over the media, the organs of propaganda, and so now. Like I think recent surveys show that rather than 2%, we're talking about like 25% of the country is really kind of become Banderite in its orientation. And that's a very worrying phenomenon.
Right. And it's being completely supported by the West. So, I just don't see this war in Ukraine really ever fully ending. You will just have this, like you've described it as a festering wound in West Ukraine, where you're going to have this hotbed of anti-Russian terrorism, just springing out of there. Okay, is there anything else you want to talk about, Dad? Or
well, there's just something on my mind. It's again, we're talking about the stupidity of the European leaders. And I would, I mentioned Kaja Kallas, but another one is von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. Recently, there was an incident where she flew to Bulgaria, and then upon landing, she claimed that the Russians had somehow interrupted or blocked the GPS signals, and that the plane had been forced to circle the airport for an hour. Now, there are people, I guess there are these, kind of groups that, these websites out there that monitor flights. And they say, according to the data they have, no such thing happened. In fact, the plane only arrived. It wasn't an hour late. It was like 9 minutes late. And there was no evidence of any interruption of the GPS signal. And then but she, and not just her, but, like the European Commission went out and made this claim, quite forcefully, that the Russians did it. But now the government, the Bulgarian government actually said, no, we looked into it. There was absolutely nothing abnormal about that flight. And I just say, what the heck is going on? I just say it's really quite extraordinary. But, this tells you a lot, again, about just the stupidity and the paranoia of the people that run Europe now.
Right.
There was a very famous book that I think it came out in the early 60s, called The Paranoid Style in American Politics. And it was directed at, actually like right-wingers in America. But these days, I think that these people are much more paranoid. The people that run, that run Europe and so many in the U.S. establishment too. If you want to look for a paranoid style in politics, you don't need to look any farther.
Yeah. Just Russia. It's all Russia's fault, right? Can we maybe end just talking a little bit about Epstein? Have you been following what's happening here?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know that there was recently some kind of hearing. I guess that was
Thomas Massey, Martin.
Yeah, that they have demanded or the release of a large trove of documents connected with Epstein. I mean, I think they are going to be released. Is that correct?
Right. Well, they are compiling a list of names just from the victims themselves, because everyone's talking about this list. Well, where is this list? Well, we can start to make a list, from these interviews, the victims. We can start naming names. So they're going to start naming names, and I guess Thomas Massey named one, John Paulson, and they're going to name more. But I'm wondering if this is. I'm interested to see where this leads. If there's some big names in there, it's kind of like what I said in the beginning. Like if there is this super tight fraternity of our elite that are bound by evil deeds, potentially a lot of them pedophilia. Once that bond, it's super strong, super tight. You did this terrible thing. I know you did it. We're not going to say anything. But once it starts to break out, then I think the knives are going to come out. And I think people are going to go after each other. I think this is just going to, break. I don't think that this Epstein thing can be a nothing burger. It's just too big that it has to break. And you got people like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene that are going against their own party, and they're going to name names. They're going to drop it. I think it's going to get messy. And I think it's just a matter, I said I was listening to Tim Dillon on Joe Rogan. I think it's going to be soon that Thomas Massey or Marjorie Taylor Greene or maybe one of these victims are going to go on Joe Rogan. And that's going to be a nuke that they're going to drop there, because you have to go big. If you kind of just sort of piecemeal it out, it gives time for the elite to suppress you, to do whatever. But if you're able to go on a program like Joe Rogan, and then it's done, it's over, it's open, and you can lay it all out and say that the dam is broken, because that is more mainstream consciousness is going through a podcast like that. And so I think it's going to get really weird pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't know what's there. But definitely there's something, and quite possibly, very plausibly, Trump is involved to some extent. You're right. You bring this up, and that it may explain his behavior. It may, so that would be interesting if we actually get some information like that. We know that he and Epstein were buddies. There are a lot of pictures of them, and it looked like maybe they shared young women or something. There really is we don't have direct evidence of that, but there's kind of reason to believe that. I don't know that any of them were underage or anything. I just don't know. He may not have done anything illegal, but if anything, it was let's say, unbecoming behavior, to use a very polite word.
Yeah, we knew he was a womanizer, and he's trades in his when his wife gets old, he trades in for a newer model. It's like we know what kind of guy he is. Right. So it's completely plausible to me. And who knows exactly what he did, but I have a strong suspicion, that he's there, and if he's named. So basically, if nukes start flying, then we know that, he was a pedophile, and that's why he launched the buttons.
Well, maybe not. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if that's what's scary is like, if the elite are being exposed, and we talk about just how much power they have, how much money they have, escape plans, they have ways to protect themselves, and they don't give a damn about normal people. So like, if they are being called out and the pitchforks are out for them, you press that button, right? You launch it. That's what's scary. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, man, once everybody's coming after you? The pitchforks are after not just you and all your buddies, all your evil, scummy elite. People know what you've been up to, know how evil you've been, but you still have the power. You control all the levers of power. Are you going to pull them all? And they're already pulling lots of them. We're seeing it. That we're seeing Israel pull lots of levers, and that's damaging for Israel. Everybody knows now, like, there's something wrong here with this relationship between Israel and the United States, and it's because Israel is being exposed, and they have the levers of power, and they're pulling them. Like, hey, you're not supposed to have access to that lever. Why is it being pulled? Right. Why can't we're not allowed to speak bad about Israel, or you'll go to jail, or you'll deport us, or like that doesn't make sense. This is America.
Right.
Okay. Well, anyways, crazy times. Right. It's wild. I just can't be a nothing burger. It's going to be big, and it's just going to rip this country and the world apart. It's so wild. It's such a crazy timeline we're living in, Dad. Okay. Any final words?
No.
Okay. All right.
Have a good weekend.
All right. Great. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Bye-bye.